Food for health micronutrient. Nutrients can be broken down into two different types. You've got your macronutrients that need to be eaten in large quantities, and these include fat, protein, and carbohydrates. And then you've got micronutrients, and these need to be eaten in small quantities. So you've got all of your vitamins, and then you've also got the minerals of calcium, sodium, iron, and phosphorus, and these are known as your micronutrients. Today we're going to be learning about the micronutrients, in particular calcium. For calcium, you need to be able to explain at least one function of calcium, name 4 sources, and explain at least one effect on health of eating too little calcium. Calcium has a few functions within the body. However, its main function you should all know about. Calcium is involved in maintaining our teeth and also our bones. It'll also help our bones and teeth to grow. So at different times of your life, you'll need more calcium. In particular, where you're going through rapid periods of growth, whether you're a child or a teenager, you'll need a lot of calcium to help support your bone growth, to help build up your baby teeth when you're a child, and also your adult teeth as you're going into your teenage years. Calcium also helps bones and teeth to repair themselves. If there's any injuries, any broken bones or teeth, calcium will help to repair those injured bones and teeth. Calcium helps to maintain the strength and hardness of our bones and teeth because it binds to the mineral called phosphorus. When they bind together, they make a compound called calcium phosphate, and that is what gives our bones and teeth the strength and hardness that they need. Calcium also has a couple of other functions within the body that we might not be so familiar with. So the first one is blood clotting. When you cut yourself, your blood will clot on the surface of the cut, and that will prevent you from losing too much blood or bleeding out. We can see on this slide here, we've got our injury or damage, the blood is leaking out of the cut. Calcium helps to form that fibrin clot, or sort of the sticky plaster over the cut, which will prevent us from bleeding out. Calcium is also responsible for the correct functioning of nerves and muscles, so it helps the brain to send signals round about the body in order for us to control the nerves and help control our muscle contractions. Our main sources of calcium are dairy foods, so things like milk, cheese, yogurt, butter are all really high in calcium, and we should be aiming for about 3 portions of those per day. If you are vegan or lactose intolerant or dairy free, then it's really important that you are choosing dairy substitutes that have been fortified with calcium. Fortified means that the calcium has been added in. So you might get a plant-based milk that has been fortified with calcium, so the calcium is added in to the same concentration, same level as cow's milk. We can also have fortified white flour, which can be then made into bread or pasta, and that can be a source of calcium. So the outside of the wheat grain, the skin of the wheat grain, is where there is a lot of calcium. When we take that skin off, then we reduce the amount of calcium that is in the wheat, the flour, the bread, etc. So by adding the calcium back in, that makes it a rich source of calcium. We also want to be having tinned fish with bones, which could be a source of calcium. So things like sardines, anchovies, tinned salmon, where the bones have been left in the fish, and as they go through the canning process, it softens the bones, which means that we're able to eat it. Obviously, calcium binds with phosphorus and makes our bones and our teeth. Therefore, by including the bones within the fish and eating those bones, it will be a rich source of calcium for us. Green leafy vegetables such as spinach, broccoli, asparagus, kale are a really rich source of calcium in our diet as well, so we want to be including those to help boost our calcium intake. We've got some alternatives to cow's milk showing on the screen here. So as I said, dairy products are a really rich source of calcium, one of the key sources of calcium within our diet. If we have a look at the bottom column, bottom row of the table, you will see that cow's milk has 119 milligrams of calcium within it. Almond milk, soya milk and rice milk, they are not a rich source of calcium. However, the manufacturers will fortify and they will add in the calcium into these plant-based milks to bring the levels of calcium up to a similar level to cow's milk. It's also important that these milks are fortified with vitamin D, because vitamin D is really important in absorbing calcium into the body. Without vitamin D, we won't be able to absorb as much calcium into the body, which means that we won't be able to use it. The milks are also fortified with other vitamins such as vitamin B12, which is predominantly found in animal products. Therefore, if you're following a plant-based, vegan, vegetarian diet, you will be lacking in vitamin B12. So that's why these vitamins have been fortified or added into the plant-based milks. If we do not have enough calcium in our diets, it can result in two different conditions. On the left-hand side of the screen, you will see the legs here are straight up and down, whereas on the right-hand side, you will see the legs are starting to bow out, they're starting to arch out. If this happens in children, it's called rickets, and if it happens in adults, it's called osteomalacia. The legs will start to bow out when we have a lack of calcium, and that's because there's not enough calcium to keep our bones strong, and it means the weight of our upper body is starting to push down on our legs, which means that they're starting to bend underneath the pressure and they will start to bow out as shown in the pictures. If we continue to have a lack of calcium throughout our lives, then we could end up with osteoporosis. So on the left-hand side, we have got a normal bone underneath a microscope. So if we were to take a slice of your bone and place it underneath the microscope, it should look like the left-hand side of the screen. So you have got holes within your bones. Our bones are porous, which means that they've got little holes. And that just means every time that you walk, the shock from your foot hitting the ground, these little holes will start to absorb that shock so it won't shatter. If we had pure bone that didn't have any holes in it, then the time that your foot hits the ground, it will start to shatter because there's nowhere for that force to go. Somebody with a prolonged lack of calcium, so lacking calcium for long periods of times, we're talking years of their life, then that will start to thin out their bones. So you can see the bones that have got osteoporosis have got much larger holes in them, they're much thinner, which means that they're going to be a lot weaker. So if you have osteoporosis, if you were to trip and fall, then you can seriously break your arms, legs, any sort of bones in your body. If you were to trip and fall and you had the normal bones on the left-hand side of the screen, then you should be fine. Osteoporosis is typically happens when you're elderly. We want to be building up our calcium intake up until about our early 30s, late 20s. That is when you actually start to lose your bone mass. So it's really important during your teenage years that you're eating enough calcium to build up strong bones. And after the age of about 30, your bones will start to decrease in mass and will start to get thinner and thinner. There are other factors that can cause osteoporosis, one of them being a lack of exercise. So we want to be having weight-bearing activities to help strengthen our bones. A weight-bearing activity is something that is putting pressure and weight onto our bones. So something where your feet or your arms are making contact to the ground. So weight-bearing activities could be like rugby, football, going to the gym on weights. Swimming wouldn't be a weight-bearing activity because the water is holding you up, so your bones aren't having to support a great amount of weight. Every time that your foot is hitting the ground when you're running, that means that you are strengthening your bones, which is helping to reduce the risk of osteoporosis. You can see here on the screen, you've got various different stages of our lives. We will need various different lengths of time where we're wanting to have physical activity. So children, we want to be having about 3 hours per day of active play. Young children and teenagers, we want to be having about an hour per day of moderate to vigorous activity. So that's something that's going to get you out of breath. Adults between 18 to 65, we want to be having 2.5 to 5 hours of moderate activity per week, or we want to be having 1.5 to 2.5 hours of vigorous activity. We also want to be strengthening our muscles as children, teenagers, adults as well, to help improve our bone density. So there are several other things that can cause osteoporosis as well. It could be a lack of sunlight. As we know, sunlight is the main source of vitamin D. There's very few food sources of vitamin D. If we have a lack of vitamin D, that means our absorption of calcium is reduced. If we don't have enough calcium, then we're not going to strengthen our bones. We're not going to build up that bone density, that bone mass that we need for strong bones and also strong teeth, which could result in osteoporosis. If you're a smoker as well, then smoking can cause the hormone calcitonin to stop working as efficiently, and that is the hormone that's responsible for building up our bones. Smoking will also damage the blood vessels, which means we've got less blood getting circulated to our bones, which can reduce their strength. Also, the nicotine in cigarettes can increase the free radicals in our body, and that can start to kill off the cells that start to make up our bones. So osteoporosis can have several different effects on our health. As we've learned, if we've got osteoporosis, our bones are a lot weaker, they're a lot more brittle, they're a lot thinner, so they're more likely to break. You can see on the screen here the top diagram of the bone. There is very few big brown dots on here, which is showing that our bones are very strong. There's very few big holes in them, which means if you were to trip and fall, then your bone's strong enough, it can absorb that impact, so it's not going to break. The bone on the bottom diagram has got a lot more holes in it, it's a lot thinner, which means if they were to trip and fall, then this bone is more likely to break because it's not as strong. We also might develop a stoop if we've got osteoporosis. So the lady that is on the left-hand side has got a normal spine. It does have a slight curve to it, as our spine does. And then we have got a progressively worse stoop as we go down the diagrams. So this is happening because there's not enough calcium to strengthen the bones that we've got in our spine, which means they are more likely to push down on each other, and then you develop this curve, this stoop in your spine. Also more likely to have backache as well, because you've got that lack of calcium to strengthen the bones, it's going to be a lot more painful. So there are several things that can impact the ability of our body to absorb certain nutrients. So we've got a diagram of our intestines on the screen here. You'll see that some nutrients are absorbed with assistance from other nutrients. However, sometimes we can have substances that will bind and surround the nutrients and prevent them from being absorbed. So in the diagram here, you can see that we have got the substance in green can sometimes surround and bind to calcium or iron that's shown in purple and prevent it from being absorbed. Because it's bound to it, it will work its way through the intestines and then eventually it will be excreted from the body. The absorption of calcium into the body can be affected by several different things. So calcium absorption can be hindered or prevented by a lack of vitamin D. As we've learned, vitamin D will help to assist the absorption of calcium. So if we don't have enough vitamin D, then that means we can't absorb the calcium into the body, so we can't make use of it. We could have a lack of vitamin D because we're not getting it out into the sunlight. It could be that we live in a country like Scotland where we don't see as much sunshine as we do in other countries, so we could be lacking in vitamin D. That's why it's recommended in Scotland that we should be having a vitamin D supplement throughout the winter months because we don't see as much sun as we should to get the amount of vitamin D that our body needs. Phytic acid and NSP or fibre is found in whole grain foods, and they both work in a very similar fashion in that they both bind to the calcium and stop it from being absorbed, so that when it's travelling through the digestive system, because the phytic acid or the NSP has bound to the calcium, it will stop the body from absorbing the calcium into the body when it's in the intestines, which means it'll travel through and our body will just get rid of it because it thinks it doesn't need it. It doesn't know that there's still calcium within that little phytic acid NSP bubble. We also might have a high fat diet as well, which can affect the absorption of calcium. So in particular, it's our saturated fats, which will bind with the calcium and make insoluble soaps. These insoluble soaps can't be absorbed into the body, so our body will just get rid of it during excretion, so we can't make use of that calcium. However, there is several things that can assist or help the absorption of calcium. So the first one we should know about is vitamin D. It will help to absorb the calcium into the body. As we know, sunshine is our main source of vitamin D, and vitamin D acts like a key. It will unlock the body so calcium can come in and our body can absorb the calcium from the foods that we've eaten. Lactose, which we typically find in cow's milk or dairy products, will help to increase the absorption of calcium into the body. And we've also got protein as well. So during digestion, protein is broken down into amino acids, and these amino acids bind with calcium and start to form soluble salts that our body can easily absorb into our body. So you can see here dairy products are a really good source of calcium, but they're also a really good source of protein and lactose, and that will help absorb the calcium into our body. Please complete the tasks that are shown on the screen. So we should be writing up our workbooks on the pages on calcium and osteoporosis, and then also adding notes on pages 26, 27 or 28 about who would need more calcium. Once you've finished that, you can have a little look at the two pieces of chocolate that are sat in front of you. And I want you to have a think about if this chocolate were bones, what has happened to them, why has it happened, and what can be done to fix them. Our second mineral that we're going to learn about today is iron. The same as the other nutrients, we should be able to explain at least one function, name 4 sources, and explain one effect in health of eating too little iron. So the functions of iron. Iron has one key function within the body in that it helps to form red blood cells, and these are some of the cells that we find within our blood. Iron in particular helps to form a part of the red blood cells called hemoglobin, and that is a protein that is responsible for transporting oxygen round about the body. Your cells will then use this oxygen for energy, which will help us to have energy for our body. So you can see in the diagram here, we've got a diagram of the artery. You've then got your healthy red blood cells floating about within your artery. And then in the circle in the middle of the diagram, you have got a little close-up of what is inside each red blood cell. So you've got the hemoglobin, which is shown as the sort of blue and green squiggles, And then within each piece of hemoglobin, you have got oxygen. So as I said before, we've got the hemoglobin within the red blood cells, and the hemoglobin has got oxygen within it. The oxygen is then transported round about the body, and our cells will use this oxygen to help produce energy. Sources of iron. So a key source of iron within our diet would be beef, lamb, pork and venison. The red meats are really rich sources of iron. They're also the most easily absorbed sources of iron within our body because they contain heme iron. However, we do have other rich sources of iron within our diets. It might just be that they can sometimes be a little bit trickier to absorb, and we'll learn about that in a few moments' time. So green leafy vegetables, they're not only a rich source of the mineral calcium, but they're also a rich source of iron. The darker green the vegetable, the more iron it would typically contain. So green leafy vegetables like spinach, broccoli, kale, cabbage, asparagus are all really rich in iron. Beans, pulses, peas are also a really rich source of iron as well. So things like chickpeas, kidney beans, lentils are really good sources of iron. We've also got cocoa powder or dark chocolate is a really good source of iron as well. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you've got your red meats, which are rich source of iron. However, if we're following a plant-based diet, we would obviously want to have our sources of iron from the green leafy vegetables, beans and pulses, or cocoa powder. The effects on health of too little iron. So if we have too little iron within our diets, in the short term, that will cause us to feel very tired. And that is because we've not got enough hemoglobin being produced within our body and our red blood cells. If we've got a lack of hemoglobin, that means we've got a lack of oxygen circulating around about the body. If we've got a lack of oxygen circulating around about the body, that means our bodies can't produce as much energy as what they would like because oxygen is what our cells use to help them produce energy. So we'll start to become fatigued and tired, which in turn might make us breathless, might make us feel dizzy as well. Because we have got less red blood cells being produced, it means that our blood isn't going to be as red in colour, which means that we are going to have quite a pale complexion to our body. In the long term, that can cause anemia. So shown on the screen here, you've got a normal amount of red blood cells. You can see that we have got lots of red bloods. We've got lots of red blood cells floating about. We've also got platelets and white blood cells. If you're anemic, then you are lacking in these red blood cells. So you can see that in the diagram, there's a lot less red blood cells compared to the normal amount. They're also a little bit smaller in size as well, which means there's not enough hemoglobin circulating round about in the body, which means a lack of oxygen getting to our cells. So what is anemia? In short, if we have anemia, we've got a lack of iron within our bodies. This could be dietary or it could be non-dietary causes. If we have a lack of iron though, we've got less red blood cells, which means we've got less hemoglobin in our bodies. And because we've got less hemoglobin, that means that there's less oxygen being transported round about the body. Because there's less oxygen getting transported round about the body, we start to feel weak and tired because we've not got oxygen getting to cells to be used as energy. We're looking pale in colour because we've not got as many red blood cells. You've got a good diagram at the top of the screen there. If you've got an anemic amount of red blood cells, then you've got a lot less compared to the normal amount. You'll also start to feel a bit colder because you've got poor regulation of body heat because you are lacking in those red blood cells. So why might your iron be low? There's several factors for this, and as I said before, it can be dietary or non-dietary factors. So it could be that you have got dietary factors, so you are deficient in iron. So it could be that you don't eat enough red meat, you've not got enough green leafy vegetables, you could be lacking in vitamin C as well. So if we don't have enough vitamin C in our diet, then we're not going to have as much iron being absorbed into our systems, which means that we are going to be lacking in iron. It could be that you're following a plant-based diet, you're vegetarian, you're vegan. That means that you're having to cut out red meat, which is a rich source of iron, and having to get your iron from plant-based sources. So your green leafy vegetables, your beans and pulses. Although they contain just as much iron as the meat would, it's not as an easily absorbed form in your plant-based sources. So it may be that you are lacking in iron because your body can't absorb as much. During pregnancy, you are growing a baby, so the baby is very greedy and it will take all the iron it needs from the mother, which means that she may be lacking. Your teenage years are a period of rapid growth. You're going through several growth spurts, so not only are your muscles growing, are your bones growing, but also the volume of blood within your body is growing. If we don't have enough iron in our diet to keep up with that, then it is quite common for teenagers to become anemic. If you're a teenage girl as well, you're going to start menstruation or you're going to start your periods, which means each month you are going to be losing blood. If we are not keeping our iron levels topped up and eating enough iron, then that means our levels are going to be a lot lower. Just like calcium, iron absorption can be affected by several different factors as well. So one of the things that hinders or prevents the lack of iron being absorbed into the body is a lack of vitamin C. So iron and vitamin C, they work together. Vitamin C helps to absorb iron into the body. So if we don't have enough vitamin C from fresh fruits and vegetables, then we're not going to have enough iron to be able to carry out our daily function. And the same as calcium, phytic acid and NSP or fibre are found in our whole grain or wholemeal foods. And what they do is they bind to the iron and stop it from being absorbed into the body. So during digestion, the iron will be travelling through the intestines. If it meets with phytic acid or it meets with fibre, they will bind to the iron and stop it from being absorbed during digestion in the intestines. This phytic acid iron combination or the fibre iron combination will then work its way through the intestines, not being absorbed, and then your body will excrete it and get rid of it, so we can't absorb any of that iron. However, iron can also be assisted in its absorption, and the one key thing that is needed for iron to be absorbed is vitamin C. So vitamin C, the main source of vitamin C is your fresh fruits and vegetables. They're really rich in vitamin C. So it's really important we are trying to have fruits and vegetables alongside our red meats, our beans and pulses, our green leafy vegetables. And vitamin C helps to absorb iron into the body. So it's like the key that unlocks the body so iron can get in. And it does this because it changes iron from non-heme to heme iron. So heme iron is the easily absorbed form of iron. This is the preferred source or type of iron that the body likes. And heme iron is typically found in your red meat. Your green leafy vegetables, your beans and pulses have got non-heme iron in them. So we do need the vitamin C alongside those sources to absorb it into the body. It's also important to note that your green leafy vegetables are really high in fibre, and your beans and pulses are really high in fibre as well. So it's important to have a vitamin C source alongside your beans and pulses, your green leafy vegetables, to absorb the iron as much as you can. So if you can complete iron and anemia pages in your workbook, and then also add your notes to page 26 to 28 about who would need more iron in their diets. Our final mineral that we're going to learn about today is sodium. So the same as the other nutrients, you should be able to explain at least one function of sodium, name 4 sources, and you should be able to explain one effect on health of eating too much sodium, but also be able to explain one effect on health of eating too little sodium. So sodium has several functions within the body. Its first function is it helps to maintain the correct balance of fluids within our body. So we take water in through foods and drinks, and then water is taken out of our body through sweat, urine, feces, breathing and talking. So sodium is responsible for keeping that balance, making sure that we are not taking in too much water and not getting rid of it, but also not to be getting rid of too much water without taking too much in. So if you are in hot weather and you're sweating quite a lot, sodium is responsible for sending signals to the brain to tell us that we're thirsty and we need to drink more so that we can get water into our body and replace the water that's been lost through sweat. Sodium also helps to transmit nerve impulses. So your brain will start to send out signals to various parts of your body, telling them to do things. Sodium is responsible for taking that message from your brain to wherever it's going in the body. And finally, sodium helps to control our body temperature. So for example, when it's really hot weather and we start to sweat, sodium is responsible for that. And it means that we are cooling down our body because we're getting rid of sweat, which will get rid of the heat from our body. So sources of sodium, or one of the key sources of sodium is sodium chloride or table salt. And often we have plenty of sodium within our diet. Sort of natural sources of sodium would be things that are coming from the sea. So things like fish and seafood and seaweed are naturally high in sodium, but the majority of our sodium intake comes from processed foods. So things like bread and cheese, butter, tinned foods, canned foods, processed foods as well. So things like ready meals, takeaways are all really high in sodium. So if you think about anything which is salty in flavour, that is going to be a source of sodium. So if we have too little sodium within the body, it can start to cause muscle cramps. So the diagram that you've been shown on the screen, the first one, you have got your calf muscle, which is in your leg, at rest. As you start to lift your leg up or you flex your calf muscle, then it will start to contract and it will start to sort of stiffen up so that you can move your leg up. When you put your foot back down on the ground, if your calf muscle doesn't relax, then that will start to cause cramp. So you've got sort of this stiff pain within your calf muscle because your muscle can't relax. And that can happen if you've not got enough sodium in your body. Effects on health of too much sodium. So in the short term, it can cause hypertension or high blood pressure. And that is because as you eat too much sodium, our body will start to cling on to water. So the more salt or sodium we eat, the more water is kept or absorbed into our body. And this water has to go somewhere if we're keeping it. So often it will go and make more blood within our body. If we have more blood traveling through our body, it's going to go at higher pressure, which can start to damage arteries and veins within our body. So in the short term, this can cause hypertension, which is just a medical term for high blood pressure. In the long term, if we continue to have this high blood pressure, because it's traveling through our veins at such a high speed, that means it's going to start to wear away at artery walls and vein walls, and it could cause them to break, and then blood can't get to our heart or our brain. It could be that they start to wear away at the artery walls, which means that cholesterol is more likely to stick to it and more likely to cause blockages within our arteries. Now, if we have a break or a blockage in an artery that leads to our brain, then it can cause a stroke. If we have a break or a blockage to our heart, then it can cause a heart attack. So remember, the arteries are responsible for delivering blood round about the body. If we don't get blood to our heart because of a break or a blockage, it'll cause a heart attack. If we don't get blood to our brain because of a break or a blockage in our artery, it will cause a stroke. On the screen here, we have got a little bit of information about what our blood pressure is. So when you, on the left-hand side of the diagram, you've got a little representation of if you were to go to the doctors and they read your blood pressure, they put the cuff onto your arm, they inflate it so it tightens really tightly round about, and then it will record the number. You've got two different numbers. You've got your systolic and diastolic pressure. Your systolic pressure is the pressure or force in the arteries when the heart beats, and it should be about 120. The diastolic pressure is the pressure measured between heartbeats, and that should be about 80. If you've got an elevated blood pressure, then that's pre-hypertension, which means that you are more likely, or you're on the track to be getting hypertension or high blood pressure, which shown here, you've got 140/90, that's hypertension or high blood pressure. As I said before, if you have high blood pressure or hypertension, you are more likely to be damaging the blood vessels to your heart, your kidneys, your brain, which means that stroke and heart attacks are much more likely. So what causes high blood pressure? As we've just spoken about, too much sodium or too much salt can cause high blood pressure. This is because the body will hold on to a lot more water if you've got a much higher sodium diet. Because we're holding on to more water, we've got to put this water somewhere, which means that your body will start to make more blood. Because we've got more blood traveling through the arteries and veins, it's going to go at a much higher pressure, which is going to result in a high blood pressure. We also might have a high fat diet, which might increase our blood pressure. And that is because we are increasing the amount of cholesterol that our bodies is making. This cholesterol will then start to stick to the artery walls, and it will start to narrow them, which means that we have got a much thinner hole or tube that the blood can travel through, which means that it's going to be going through at a much higher force, so it's going to be causing high blood pressure. So we've got a little video here about what a stroke is.
Hello, in this health sketch we want to talk to you about stroke. It's a bit of an odd name, stroke. It certainly has nothing to do with tennis strokes, swimming strokes, or brush strokes. The word stroke comes from the idea of receiving a strike or blow, as that is how quickly strokes appear. All of a sudden, people are struck by this illness. Did you know that every year more than 15 million people worldwide have a stroke? Of these, 5 million die and another 5 million are left disabled. Whilst most strokes occur in people over the age of 65, they can occur in much younger people too. But what exactly is a stroke? The brain, like all parts of the body, needs oxygen, which it gets from the blood. A stroke happens when blood flow to the brain is cut off. When brain cells are starved of oxygen, they become damaged, and the symptoms that follow are called a stroke. As the brain controls the whole body, the symptoms of a stroke can be wide-ranging, depending on which parts of the brain are affected. If the stroke occurs here, it would cause a drooping face. Here, weakness in the arms or legs. Or here, difficulty speaking. Other symptoms can happen too, like changes to vision, loss of balance, confusion, and memory loss. The effects might be barely noticeable, but are more often severe and disabling. Sometimes these changes can be reversed if treatment is started early. That's why it is so important to act quickly if you suspect a stroke. Remember, you need to get help fast. F is for face. Is their face drooping on one side? Can they smile? A is for arms. Is there weakness in the arms? Can they lift them both up? S is for speech. Is their speech slurred? T is for time. If you spot any one of these signs, then it's time to call an ambulance. Once the ambulance arrives at the hospital, a doctor will assess you and arrange an urgent scan of the head, which shows where the brain is damaged and what type of stroke has happened. Strokes are put into two groups depending on the problem in the blood vessels supplying the brain. There can either be a blockage, called an ischemic stroke, or a bleed, called a hemorrhagic stroke. The majority of strokes are blockages. It's important to identify early on which sort of stroke has happened, as they each have very different treatments. Blockage strokes are commonly caused by the buildup of fatty material in blood vessels. This fatty buildup may lead to a clot, which blocks the blood supply, just like in a heart attack. This is why a stroke can be thought of as a brain attack. A clot may occur within the brain, or it can travel from another part of the body, commonly the blood vessels in the neck. Clots can also travel from the heart, which may happen when you have an irregular heartbeat called atrial fibrillation, or AF. If a blockage stroke is detected within the first few hours, a clot-busting medication is sometimes given to dissolve the clot. This is called thrombolysis. If thrombolysis can't be used, other medications such as aspirin will be given as treatment instead. Bleeding strokes happen when a blood vessel bursts suddenly, causing blood to leak in or around the brain. In these strokes, blood on the brain can lead to swelling, a serious problem which may require surgery in some cases. Sometimes, stroke symptoms completely disappear in less than 24 hours. This is called a mini-stroke, or TIA. Often, symptoms only last a few minutes, but just like with a full-blown stroke, you must go to hospital immediately if you suspect a TIA. This is because a TIA is a warning sign that you're at high risk of having a full stroke. Whether you have a TIA or a full stroke, daily medications are started and continued lifelong to help prevent further episodes. The effects of a stroke can be disabling, but given time, the brain can slowly adapt to recover some previously lost abilities. This is why stroke rehabilitation is so important. Rehab can be challenging, but many specialists are on hand to help alongside doctors and nurses. If your stroke causes difficulty swallowing, dietitians can recommend special diets or feeding tubes. If you have problems with communication, speech and language therapists can help. If it has become difficult to walk or perform daily tasks, physiotherapists and occupational therapists can offer exercises and home adaptations. Also, after a stroke, people often feel low or frustrated that they can't do the things they used to, and don't like being dependent on others. Counselors can help talk through these feelings, and many patient groups are available for further support. We've talked a lot about strokes, but what can we do to prevent them from happening? Even if you've already had a stroke in the past, there are many small steps we can all take to reduce our future risk of having a stroke, such as lowering high blood pressure, the #1 cause of stroke, stopping smoking, lowering cholesterol, being more active, eating healthily, lowering alcohol intake to within recommended limits. If you have diabetes, keeping good control of blood sugar levels. In this health sketch, we've talked about what a stroke is, how to spot the key symptoms, and the need to act fast. We've also talked about treatments, rehab, and the steps we can take to prevent strokes. We hope this health sketch about stroke has been helpful for you and those around you. Health sketch, health for all to see. Hello.
So if you can now complete the pages on sodium and high blood pressure in your workbooks, and then you can also add notes about who you think would need more sodium or even less sodium in their diets, please.